Call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to take roll call, please.
Branch.
Here.
Bray.
Here.
Carroll. Graham.
Present.
Henry.
Here.
Hussey.
Here.
Mahalovich.
Here.
Prather.
Here.
Schulte.
Here.
Scrivener.
Here.
Okay, good evening and welcome to City Hall. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to continue our budget discussions. When we finished up our last meeting, we were ready to hear from Parks and Rec on their proposed budget. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lockwood.
Sorry about that. The future replacement of mechanical and stationary equipment in all of our facilities and throughout the park system. It also allocates an additional $300,000 from the park fund balance toward the commission's goal of constructing an indoor multi-purpose recreation building while maintaining a park fund balance operating reserve at 12%, which I think is the goal you all had established for the general fund as well. And finally, it establishes a leadership transition plan in preparation for the eventual retirement of the current director. I think all of you have probably a packet in front of you with the line item budget and also what we refer to as our pink sheets, just like to highlight the fact that all the pink sheet items are funded in the numbers that are before you. And at this point, I think I'll just be happy to answer any questions that any of you might have regarding the commission's budget.
Mr. Lockwood, if you wouldn't mind, would you kind of give us an overview of how the budget process works for you with the commission and the process that you go through with that, please?
Right, again, we get our budget assignments along with all of the other departments early spring, and we talked about the budget in general at a couple commission meetings. We then established 2 dedicated budget work sessions where the commission went through the budget in detail and eventually brought it back to the full commission for approval. I believe it was in June or July, I forget which month it was, and submitted to the city administrator for inclusion in the budget that's presented to the mayor.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Lockwood, too, thank you and your staff for all the work that you do for the city, and Mrs. Chaplin, Mr. Miller, thank you for being here tonight and for your work on the commission, too. So thank you. Mr. Henry, questions?
Yes. Bill, there's been some discussion about some shortfalls between the golf course and the ice rink. Just for the public, could you explain how those shortfalls are made up? Because seems to be some significant numbers. Could you just explain how those shortfalls are made up?
Right, I mean, we're a service department industry, and just like all other city departments, a lot of what we do is subsidized. I don't know that any department other than wastewater maybe makes money with the city. I think it's a philosophy issue. We are providing service. We want to try to provide the best service in an affordable manner that we can. The fact that those facilities that were mentioned are subsidized really is nothing new. We work and try to operate them, making business-like decisions to minimize the amount of subsidy that we have to give to them, but it's kind of a balancing act, trying to maintain and develop and have nice quality facilities for the public, while at the same time trying to keep charges for uses of those facilities in a reasonable, affordable manner so that our public can take advantage of them.
Thank you.
Mr. Prather?
Along the same lines, is that something that the commission looks at to try to improve the profit margin, or is that something that's it is what it is?
We are constantly striving. Obviously, costs increase faster than revenues at virtually all of our facilities, so it's an annual struggle. We take a serious look at all of our fees and charges every year, and I think we've got a pretty good track record of increasing incrementally as those costs go up. It becomes more and more of a challenge, obviously, to close the gap between costs and revenues, particularly in this economy. But it's something that we look at. We know that virtually all of our operations are subsidized, some more than others. But again, we're a service industry, I guess, just like all the other city departments. We don't feel our mission is to be in business to make money off the public on any of these facilities, but we do try to minimize in any way we can the subsidy that we do have to give to them. And typically it's made up from our local park sales tax, which was approved by voters.
Mr. Scrivener?
Bill, I have 3 or 4 questions for you. Do you know, or are those numbers on the top of your head, maybe just how much subsidy there is at the ice arena and golf course?
I don't have those numbers with me. I've got a 25-year history. I can show you every year for that time how much subsidy has gone into ice arena, both each of the swimming pools, the golf course, and into our recreation programming. I neglected to bring that, but I'd be happy to get you a copy of that.
Okay, and I would appreciate a copy. Do your subsidies in any way, are they exacerbated, I guess, by some of the improvements that you've been done? I mean, I don't know how you do your accounting. Do you account for your capital improvements separately from your operating budget? Are we talking about a subsidy for operating budget, essentially?
Yes, right. Capital items are generally separated and funded in the capital budget.
Okay, and you mentioned a couple of times here and for some reason, the name went right out of my head, but a plan that it's been approved by voters, a stewardship plan, I think you referred to it as.
Right. When we went to the voters back in 2005 to remove the property tax for parks and substitute the sales tax in place of that, we put together a campaign plan on the issues that we were going to be addressing if that funding was available, and we try to remind ourselves every year what that commitment was and tailor our budget to make sure that we're not forgetting that we promised to do certain things. And so that's a big part of our focus every year when we start the budget.
I've probably had an opportunity to see that plan at some time or another, but while you're gathering things up, if you'd get me a copy of that, I'd appreciate it.
It's pretty much a fourfold thing, and I touch on some of those items in the summary here, but basically involves a program of replacing vehicles and equipment, improving maintenance, and setting aside some reserves for major expenses. I know you all are struggling now with trying to do an HVAC system for the fire station. We've tried to provide for those kind of things by setting money aside for that purpose, not spending it in the current budget year, but knowing full well we're going to have to spend that money down the road.
It's a good idea. And then, I guess last but not least, there's been conversation in the community, letters to the editor from time to time, and just people that have contacted me face to face and have had questions about the feasibility, and I know you're a long ways down the road at this point, but I'd like to hear your response to some of the folks that have questioned why there's not an attempt to combine funds between the funds for your multipurpose building and the conference center, and why the city is not maybe building one facility instead of multiple facilities. I know you've shared your ideas with me, but I don't know that the public's heard it.
I mean, I think that's been in and out of discussions for the last couple of years. I think eventually we saw those being on two different time frames and two different tracks, and have kind of progressed ahead. That doesn't necessarily mean it's still not an open discussion, but it looked like that maybe was something that wasn't going to work out, and we've kind of elected to move forward with our separate facility, building something that we think we can afford to build, and also to sustain its operation with money that we know is going to be available to us in the future. I mean, that's certainly a discussion the commission could have yet if any specific proposals came forward. It's an interesting idea. I think it's been explored to some extent, off and on. There maybe are a few limited examples of that particular combination working other places, but I'm not very familiar with them. We're obviously having to look at building a building much more utilitarian in nature, I suppose, than many people would like to see from the focus group meetings and the efforts that we've had in the public. But again, probably our biggest worry is sustaining the operation of it in the long haul. Building it as tough as it's been is probably the easiest part.
Yeah, I think that when you and I have talked, that's been, again, your emphasis has been on concerns about operating something. Do you see it more as a financial operating burden rather than a administrative operating burden, or do you see it as both?
I'm more concerned about the financial. Again, it would be a subsidized facility, just like we got talking about the golf course and the ice arena and other things. It's not a facility that will generate a great deal of revenue, and that's the part we need to be able to sustain that difference, over the next 20, 25 years, that, the building would be in operation, and probably longer than that.
I'll just say, because I might not get a chance to do it publicly, I appreciate what you've done for the park system over the years. You've done a good job of managing and administrating and growing the service. Don't agree with 100% of what you've done, but you wouldn't expect me to, would you, Bill?
Well, no, not, but I appreciate the support that all the council has given to the commission. Now, I think we have a good working relationship, and I hope we can keep it. I think we're all after the same goals. It may be a little bit different idea of how to get there sometimes, but thank you.
I agree. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mihalovich.
Your report to revenue. You have half-cent sales tax, and I see you projecting that. And we have half-cent sales tax revenue stream. Shouldn't those be the exact same figure?
As what you're projecting, I
Yeah.
think they're pretty close. I've tended to be more conservative than our finance department in the past, but I think our budget numbers for next year are pretty well on
And
on the
if
money, I think,
if,
so.
over time we could, I could see that in this. I can't see where this, it may be combined, but, and, yeah, any other follow-up you have with regard to why they're different?
Well, it's difficult to explain why they are different, but they are different. You know, the monthly reports that you get every month, they're a half-cent sales tax. So in theory, if you took our 1 cent sales tax and divided it by half, you should get the number that is parks. And you should also get the same number for the capital improvement half-cent sales tax. That does not work out that way. We have inquired numerous times with the Department of Revenue about why that is. And what we're told is that they apply the tax on different things depending on when the tax was imposed. And so you will see months when parks may go up and general revenue goes down and sales tax goes up, or any of the three combinations of those. And they neither are the same nor do they track completely with each other. I mean, in general, they kind of run, but mathematically, it never works out.
Thank you. Another follow-up. I think I looked under, you have 400 and maybe 60,000 worth of projects this year?
Yes. I believe 300,000 of that is what I mentioned is being channeled to our multi-purpose building efforts, and I can find my place here. I can tell you what the others for. It's actually $420,000. $120,000 is going into playground improvement category. Our next scheduled playground replacement in next year's budget would be at McClung Park. Memorial Park is in the current year budget. So
Okay.
those two together are
Okay.
comprise that capital element.
Good, I see also some projects on the Greenway expansion, maybe.
Are you looking at the local park sales tax or
No.
sales tax F?
I'm looking at F.
Oh, okay, yes. And I don't have that list in front of me, but yes, there are a number of items as listed in there that are part of F in the park system improvement as well. Greenway, and I think maybe a little money at the golf course, and I'd have to look at the list to tell you for
North
sure
Jefferson,
what else is
probably.
on there.
Small park projects, I think. Good. One last question is, I had the opportunity to view one of your presentations on a system of accountability that you've undertaken. Could you kind of explain that for the benefit of those that may have not seen that presentation?
And you're probably not going to get any updated figures in that for a while. We lost our staff member who was responsible for that, but it's called ProRageous. It's a national system. It's called Park and Recreation Operating Ratio and GIS study, and it provides kind of a benchmark database in order for you to compare, how well you're doing budget-wise with number of employees, population served, and a wide variety of things that kind of give you a general feeling of how you're stacking up against other places, a number of employees per acre of parkland maintained, those sorts of things. And we did include some numbers in last year's budget. They're still relatively close, but since we were short a staff member, we have not had an opportunity to update those from last year. There wouldn't be any dramatic changes, but there would be some.
Well, I appreciate those numbers, and I think that anybody that questions, that department, I think you have some accountability figures there. They may not all be the top of the charts, but they show where you are relative to benchmarked Parks and Recs department nationally, so.
I think we're doing a reasonable job according to those standards.
I congratulate you on that effort.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Graham?
All right, I just have two questions for you. I guess I'm looking at, on page 165, I'm looking at the multi-purpose building, in which, in this presentation, you said 300,000, and I'm looking at 360,000. Sales tax F, yeah.
Yes, that is an additional 360 from sales tax F. When that was approved by voters, I think we had about 1.15 million included in sales tax F. There's a little bit of money in sales tax E also that was approved for this project, but the bulk of the money that's been built up toward it so far is in the local park sales tax, and that was the $300,000 that I referred to earlier.
Okay. And then you have $1 million for Frog Hollow. Oh, general project, okay. Okay, gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I was about to ask you a couple of questions if something wasn't in your budget.
Okay. We'll take it. Okay.
Mr. Hesse?
Just a quick question. Bill, what's your total cash accumulation right now for the multi-purpose building, do you know?
I believe we're right at about 2.4 million presently. Just a second, I might have that. I mean, we've identified for that project as a whole a goal of $5 million is all that we feel like we're able to sustain over time. The bulk of that money is at hand, but I think it also, our funding plan that we put together also requires us to devote some additional funding to it for the next 2 years during the rest of planning and early construction as well to reach that amount.
So does that 2.4 roughly, does that include the 1.15 from sales tax F, or is that?
I
separate?
believe it does, and all of that is not collected yet. The 360 that was referred to is in next year's budget that will add to it. I think that may be the last contribution toward that building from sales tax F.
All right, thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Lockwood? Okay, thank you. And just so we follow the same procedures that we have for all departments, I'll give the council an opportunity. I would like to go through basically the budget and just give you an opportunity to ask any more questions. So revenue, pages 169 through 175. Any questions on revenue 169 through 175? Okay, under expenses, administration, 176, 177. Any questions? 176, 177. Okay, ice arena, 178 and 179. Mr. Prather.
Question on personnel services, It's dropped from 2012 from 350,000 all the way down to 215,000. Did we cut back on employees, or what was the cause of that?
The way we put our budget together, we budget staff, and some of them are allocated percentage-wise to different parts of the budget. But regardless of that, if our maintenance staff works at that facility, the ice arena, golf course, or swimming pools, we have a mechanism in our payroll to be able to charge their time against that facility so that we get an accurate picture of what really the maintenance and operating costs are. The way the budget's put together, there's really no way to exceed your budget for permanent personnel. It's a self-regulating system, so as long as you have them budget, we try to budget them where we think we're going to use them, but if they happen to work elsewhere, it's counted for where they spend their time. Helps us do a better job, we feel like, of managing our resources.
I'll jump ahead a little bit because this kind of relates. I guess that would be just the opposite for the golf course. That increased quite a bit, about $40,000 since 2012. So, I mean, that would probably be the same answer.
Yes, I think so. We're not increasing any permanent or part-time staff at any location. I believe we did provide for a slight increase in all of our minimum wage salaries this year. I think it's $0.10 an hour for returning employees. But we feel like we have to do that to remain competitive.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any other questions, Ice Arena? Okay, golf course, 180, 181. Okay, Memorial Pool, 182, 183. Okay, Mr. Scrivener, golf course.
When you're setting fees, greens fees and et cetera on the golf course, are you trying to be competitive with local golf courses? I guess I'm thinking, again, going back to a meeting here where a gentleman was questioning whether or not the Park Service should be in competition with businesses. How do you set? Do you undercut their rates? Do you bill at the same rate, or?
We don't intentionally undercut. I think there's been an effort on others' parts to try to be less than we are. We really felt like we didn't want to get into that kind of game, so to speak. We try to keep them reasonable to reflect in a reasonable amount of cost recovery. But we do have to pay attention to it, obviously. We're not doing the public any good if we maintain a great golf course out there and nobody comes to play at it because they can't afford it. And people are very cost conscious here in Jefferson City, much more so, I think, in recent years than they are condition conscious about the property. It used to be the other way around quite a bit, but we pay attention to it. We don't collude with them to set rates or anything, but we try to take advantage of special offers and opportunities and discount coupons, things like that, which encourage people to come out and use our facility.
I guess, again, maybe we had the opportunity to ask these questions earlier, but from a standpoint of looking into the future, if there are commercial courses around, and we know there are, and they have rates that are similar to ours, and yet we operate at a significant subsidy, and they presumably are making some kind of a profit, or they wouldn't continue to operate from year to year. Why is it that we can't break even in our golf course?
I think it's simply a matter of the rates we charge. They're considerably less than some area courses. One course in particular is typically more in line with us. The others are considerably higher. You know, I hate to use the cliche, you know, we were here first and everybody came in afterward, but, you know, we're definitely overbuilt in the golf market in Jefferson City, and we are the only public course in Jefferson City. You know, there may be a point in time that has to be a serious consideration, but we've said, you know, if we had that property which was given to the city for park purposes, if we didn't run a golf course on it, you know, how much is it going to cost us to maintain it for general public use? And the amount of subsidy that we're putting into that course, probably no more than what it would cost just to maintain the property for other uses if it wasn't a golf course. Plus, you have millions of dollars in investment sitting out there that would be essentially thrown to waste if it was abandoned as a golf course.
I don't know what the answer is, but given the fact that we do directly compete with other commercial interests, and those commercial interests do provide a service that a lot of the public finds necessary, I really think that's something that over time we ought to evaluate, and it's either a place where we need to clean up some of the subsidy, or it's a place maybe we need to consider whether or not we're serving a purpose or whether we're just competing with legitimate businesses.
I think it's probably a discussion in every city that has a municipal golf course. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Mihalovich?
A little follow-up, you know, most golf courses aren't that competitive as they used to be, maybe, but I think the two things that they offer a lot of times is real estate adjacent to golf courses and alcohol sales, which draws in tournaments and such. Am I correct, you still don't have alcohol sales?
That's correct. We think that would do a lot to reduce the amount of subsidy. We're obviously at a disadvantage to some locations that have the ability to offer that as a part of their sales package. And, you know, I think all of you are probably familiar with the restrictions on why we don't. Kind of looking into issues related to clearing the title, but I don't think it's anything that will happen quickly or easily. But something that's kind of on our mind every year. We think, you know, that would do a lot to improve the bottom line out there. But on the other hand, you know, people look at it as not having the hassle of dealing with that situation out there. It's more of a wholesome child, youth, family atmosphere. So some of those things kind of counterbalance a little bit.
Mr. Hussey?
Not to belabor the golf course point, but it is the host location as well for the state cross-country meet. Or I think is it still hosted there?
Yes, it is, and we're also having another huge event added out there. I think I mentioned to you all in a previous meeting, state Capital City Cross Country Challenge on October 4th, which proves to be even bigger than the state cross country meet. But I think at one time I did an analysis of the economic impact of just the state cross country meet alone, and it far exceeds the annual subsidy to the golf course. So if you look at benefits to the community as a whole, now this second event could prove to be even more advantageous than the first. So.
And that was going to be my follow-up.
Yeah.
Was I would imagine, having run that twice, or well, a lot of that does damage to the golf course. So there's probably some significant maintenance work that needs to take place after those meets. I'm thinking the state meet in November. Are those maintenance costs or repairs that need to be done to the course, are they factored into the golf course budget, or are they paid?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So part of your subsidy is really, at the same time, repairing the course from hosting an event like that.
Right. We spend a lot of staff time and effort in hosting the state cross-country meet. It's a big loser for the course directly, but you know, obviously it has great spin-off benefits for the whole community, and we're pleased to be able to do that. But over the years we've tried to modify the course, the running course, and we don't suffer near the damage we used to. The course is generally in better condition as a whole, and but yeah, there have been times in the past when we've run in the rain and snow. It pretty much looked like a plowed cornfield after the event was over with, but we've been very fortunate the last 10 or 15 years and really haven't encountered that kind of a situation out there.
Other questions on the golf course? Okay, Memorial Pool, 182, 183. Okay, Ellis Porter, 184, 185. Maintenance, 186, 187. Recreation programs, 188, 189. Transfers, 190. Capital projects, 191, 192, and 193. Okay, that's it. Mr. Lockwood, thank you.
Okay, just call your attention again briefly to the packet I handed out in front of you. It includes program brochures from full year. The latest one that's just off the press, I think, is included in that stack as the last one, but that should give you a pretty good description of what the budget pays for as way of programming on a year-round basis. And thank you for your time and for entertaining our budget this evening.
Thank you. Okay, we have made it through revenues, and we've made it through all of the departments, including enterprise funds. I've asked Mr. Nicholas, Mr. Betts could not be here with us this evening, so I've asked Mr. Nicholas to look forward and tell us where we are at today if we were to begin next year's budget process. Where are we at today if we begin next year's budget process today based upon the budget that you have before us? So, Mr. Nicholas.
Yeah, and of course, it's, I should preface by saying it's a bit of crystal ball gazing, but what we kind of look at is the expenses that we have in the budget today, and then what expenses we know will be increased in the future, and then subtract from that, a guesstimate about what we think the income increase would be. There's a number of significant factors that are probably worth mentioning. One is that one of the things that we're doing to finance the budget this year is we've got that $300,000 from transit. So that $300,000 alone is kind of a one-time fee, and we'll have to make that up next year. We did receive good news that the pension will not be going up next year. That's the estimate that we're getting from loggers. And of course, that's 2 years out. But we do expect that health insurance will be going up. And figuring all of that in and not figuring any new positions being created, any new expenses, the net is about $345,000 in the hole on day one. And of course, there will be new expenses and things that need to be added, so that would all adjust that. So my urging is to have as few things in the budget as possible that are continuing expenses.
Questions for Mr. Nicholas regarding that? Mr. Scrivener.
I believe that there was like a $75,000 or $85,000 building permit. I think $85,000, which you almost have to look at as a one-time revenue for this year. Although we may have another large project next year, but the size of St. Mary's don't come along very often.
We did add in one building permit into the budget for this year, and that was not St. Mary's. St. Mary's was in the current fiscal year, and that was a huge building permit. This year, we did add in some money to factor in for the capital region expansion because we had information that would in fact be, that permit would be begun this year. We don't like to just guess, but we had pretty solid information on that. You could look at that there's potential for new ones next year. There's certainly some projects that we all know are coming along. Any one of those might, increase some on the building permit, but that's a pretty small thing. I did leave out that there's $75,000 a year payment that we need to be making to the fireman's pension. We kind of decided that we would do, and so that would need to be factored in. But we're kind of really looking at the big pictures, and I would say that those numbers that I gave you were before we knew some of the things that have been subsequently added. So fire chief isn't in there. That would add another 60,000 to that number.
Just 60?
Well, there's half of that is in the budget now, 70,000, and yeah, maybe a little low. We figure the cost of a fire chief to be about 140,000, so there'd be another 70 you'd have to add in to next year's budget.
Mr. Hilpert?
I just had really a question, because I've heard that number from Bill too, but that includes if you don't buy any cars, right?
That's not buying anything. That's no raises, no new employees, no buying anything, just essentially what's in this year's budget.
Okay, I believe that to be the case, but I want to make sure everybody understood that.
Mayor?
I would believe, from what Nathan's saying, that it also would include our current sales tax revenues as projected. I think as we've all talked about over the last month and a half to 2 months, maybe 3 months, that there's some obviously big things on the horizon that will affect that. So
Again, you can look at the figures and it's my vision into the future is not any better than anyone else's, and it's not that good. We just figured in calculating that what our normal sales tax and property tax growth would be, and as I said many times, that our overall growth is about 2%. Yes, there are some things, you might get some bursts here or there, or the economy may pick up. There's a number of things that could impact that.
Mr. Henry?
Nathan, I just had a quick question for you. As far as that transit account goes, how often or how often should that account be swept?
Oh, it should be swept at least once a year, and why it wasn't, I'm not sure.
Other questions? I just thought that was important that we all understand that we're not, if we were to start the budget process from this budget next year, we're not at zero. There's some money that's going to have to be found, and so it's just important that we all understand that and recognize that. So, okay, at this time, any budget amendments that the council would like to consider? Mr. Mihalovich, and just to remind the council, if you have an expense that you would like to add to the budget, we need an offsetting line item for that. If you have the page numbers that you're referring to, that might be helpful so that we can all get to those page numbers. If you don't, we can find them, but if you do, that would be helpful. Mr. Mihalovich.
I also, just a rough estimate, we have about 800,000, looks like, in pink sheet items that aren't funded now and aren't funded next year as well. They don't go away, I assume. Mosquitoes don't go away, I know.
That is correct.
I do have an amendment to this budget. I'd like to move that we put 5,000 towards Salute to America. I think it was kind of inadvertently left out, actually. And 2,500 into the Cultural Arts Commission, And those would come from the 7,500 that we put in the budget back into contingency that was in there for the floating holidays. So I'm just washing essentially what went back into contingency from the mayor's presentation and adding back in Salute to America. And while the Cultural Arts Commission actually could use 3,000, I'm doing easy math and putting 2,500 back into cultural arts. I have a presentation Monday with regard to the good things that they're doing, and I feel like it's a very small investment for all the work that they're putting forth and leveraging those dollars that we give them towards building a foundation to establishing public arts for such a small investment. Furthermore, well, I just believe that we would get return on investment. I guess I need a second before we discuss.
Correct. So we have a motion on the floor to fund an additional $5,000 to Salute to America, $2,500 to the Cultural Arts Commission, and the offset account would be the $7,500 that we added back in on the floating holidays, correct?
Just for clarity, actually, the offset is just the contingency
Right, it
account,
went back
right?
in the
I mean, I just want to be
contingency.
clear, it's
Yeah,
not,
that is correct.
we're not making a choice here, it's just coming out
That
of
is correct.
contingency.
That is correct. So do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion on the floor? Mr. Bray?
Where is Salute to America and Cultural Arts Commission at this point?
Page 140? Page 40?
What are they in the budget for presently?
Did you say page 40?
Yeah, I have page 40, and it's in for 5, and the request is typically 10,000 for the Salute to America. And then a couple lines below that is the cultural arts.
So it's in your non-departmental tab, page 40. Mr. Scrivener?
Again, I don't know if this would make it easier to address individual things, because Councilman Hussey just said, I want to make sure that, that's not a final decision on the 7,500. Would it be easier if, as long as there's money there in the contingency, that everything that you want to fund, that you, for the time being, at least take it out of contingency, and then you could talk about these other things individually, and as you take them away, put them back into contingency?
I would prefer that we stick with providing an offset, because somebody may have an offset of another category besides contingency that they really feel like that would be the best place to fund it from.
Okay.
And they want to leave contingency alone. So I would prefer that if everybody says contingency, that's fine, but if somebody has a spot that they would rather use the offset for, I think we need to leave that option available.
I just visualize us going through and having a motion to take it out of one category, and then a motion to put that category back and take it out of something else, and then go, I could just see us taking two motions to do everything that we want to do, but maybe that'll be what'll happen anyway.
Mr. Graham?
Under the contingency fund, who controls the contingency fund?
The contingency fund, it's my understanding, and Mr. Nicholas, you and Sheila, correct me, that fund is not, you do not, the city administrator does not have to have authorization of the council to use or to expend those funds. If it's in the fund balance, the council has to authorize those funds to be expended.
So right now, the contingency fund at 72 is at the discretion of the city administrator to use.
That is correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Mayor?
I'm not sure, I'd ask Nathan or Sheila, but I was thinking for some reason there was a dollar amount for the city administrator, period.
Yeah, the single purchase limit would be 25,000.
I think at one time on one of these sheets, and it's been a few months ago, but I was thinking there's some notes that said that administrator would tell you the council when used, if I remember right.
Mr. Hilbert?
I was just going to say, the way I'd explain it is that money is budgeted for the council to be spent, but just like everything else, if it's more than $25,000, it has to come before the council. And then just as a secondary precaution, because we haven't had anything this high before, the city administrator and the mayor talked, and Nathan will notify the council of any money expended out of that account. I think the original idea being that we've kind of wrenched down the budget pretty tight, and so if we've underfunded something or overfunded something, the council will, there's some cushion in there. Now with luck, maybe things go well, you won't have to touch that at all, and it'll go back to fund balance at the end of the year. But it was just a precaution, and Nathan has agreed to notify you of any time he spends any money out of that.
Prior to, or just,
I wasn't in on that part, but
I wasn't thinking prior to, because I think some of these will be very small.
I would agree with Nathan. I mean, I don't think we had to use his word here, micromanage, but I mean, there are small numbers that obviously he's going to deal with. So the only other way around that would be to make that part of the reserve fund.
okay. Mr. Prather?
Was there another fund that we had out there that special events or something like that we were intending to use for the same purpose?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Mr. Nicholas?
Yes, we were intending to use special events. There is a line item for Salute to America, and it does have 5,000. And what we did last year was we took 5,000 out of special events, and that was our intent to do the same thing this year.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is Salute to America, the intention is to fund it at 10,000 in the current budget. Okay. Mrs. Carroll?
So does that change Rick's motion then? You're saying it's already in there, like kind of, I thought Rick was asking to add it in. Add the additional 5,000 to
Well,
equal 10.
If you added 5 into Salute to America, there would no longer be a need to transfer 5 from special events to Salute to America, so that would leave $5,000 extra in special events.
So special events, that's 12,000 would be reduced by 5. Is that right?
Well, that wasn't the motion, but
But that's the current plan before the motion.
yes.
So the current plan prior to the motion was to fund Salute to America at 10,000. So, Mr. Mihalovich, do you want to leave your motion as is? And then there would be 5,000 extra in special events?
You know, when we talked about this during our discussions, it seems like we went through what we spent that special events on last year, and Salute to America didn't come up as being used. So I made the assumption that it came out of some other.
I think when we looked at special events, there was a wide range of things that had been covered, but we did talk about it at the time because the question was, why is there only 5,000 in the budget, with 10,000 being the known costs that we had in the current year?
I guess my preference is to show that we have 10,000 in Salute to America to a real cost. And therefore, I would be willing to withdraw my motion if my second would withdraw it, and I'll restate it.
Okay, motion withdrawn. Mr. Mihalovich, would you like to restate?
I'd like to move that we show that there's 10,000 in Salute to America and move that out of special events. And I'll make it simple. I'll just leave that on the table for right now.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor to move $5,000 from special events to Salute to America. Further discussion? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Branch,
Yes.
Bray,
Aye.
Carroll,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Henry,
Aye.
Hussey,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather,
Aye.
Schulte,
Aye.
Scrivener.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, Mr. Mahalovich.
Okay, I'm just going to make a motion to have $2,500. Wait, now I have $7,500 to play with now. My math, I will continue the motion to have $2,500 put back in cultural arts
Being
from
funded.
contingency.
Okay,
Second.
motion. We have a motion and a second on the floor to fund cultural arts at 2,500. The offset account is contingency. Further discussion. Mr. Bray.
About $1,000, thank you. About $1,000 had been expended of a $6,200 budget. So are there some big dollar items coming up in cultural arts here in the next month or two? Does anyone know? Right now, it looks like the cultural, there's still $5,000 in their account, in their line item, so.
Mr. Mahalovich.
That came up, and I think there's some reimbursements that are due, and they're having an event coming up that there's going to be some funds expended in the very near future. They also have some artwork that's being produced right now, and I believe they're on target to spend all of that. And I'm getting a nod from Gail, who is a staff liaison, as that's true.
It is one of those special events, at the Cork? What are they doing at the Cork? What is that?
You donate a rocking chair. You have an artist do a painting and a decorating of the rocking chair, and then they'll auction that off and then have a fundraiser.
A fundraiser for the cultural arts.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Carroll?
And on that note of support, I know this Cultural Arts Commission has done a lot of independent fundraising, really more than any commission I've seen. I know they've really been dedicated to raising their own funds. So what we're supplementing them with, they are meeting, I'd say, that those goals of raising their own funds as well to supplement the art, and they're a very hardworking committee. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions, comments before we vote? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Bray,
No.
Carroll,
Aye.
Graham,
Aye.
Henry,
No.
Hussey,
Aye.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather,
Aye.
Schulte,
No.
Scrivener,
Aye.
Branch.
Aye.
Mm-hmm.
7-3, motion carries. Other,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Hussey?
I would make a motion to strike the finance director line item from the budget of $130,000. I would allocate $60,000 of that towards the patch truck for Public Works. $14,000 of that towards the software package for the Human Resources Department. $2,000 of that towards the Human Resources lock purchase. $8,500 towards the Public Works trailer on their pink sheet. And then whatever I have left, I would dump into contingency for right now.
Somebody doing the math? I've got 130 minus 84.5.
That sounds right.
45,500.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to omit the finance director at 130,000, purchase the patch truck for 60,000, purchase software for human resources employee application software, $14,000, $2,000 for an HR lock, and $8,500 for a public works trailer, and then $45,500 to go back into contingency. Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion. Mr. Hussey.
Here's my purpose. We've heard Mr. Nicholas talk earlier about the 15 budget and a lot of holdover costs. And we've got a lot of pink sheets and a lot of capital items that are just going to carry forward if we don't take action on them. My belief is that we are getting the service we need out of Bill Betts in the finance department right now. I'm not saying that's a long-term solution, but I think it's an idea worth further exploration. Prior to my time on the council, there was discussion about the creation of an assistant city administrator position and consolidation of some of that. I don't know what happened in that conversation, and I don't know where it's at, but I think that's worth exploring as to long-term, what does the management of the finance department look like? I'm concerned about dedicating $130,000 in salary to a staff position so that we can state that a city our size has a finance director, when it seems as though most of us are fairly pleased with the service that's being provided by Bill right now, the budget, the reporting, and the information we're finding. And so I think with eyes towards 2015, it seems as though we can put off the hiring of that finance director, continue with services that Mr. Betts is providing in the department, and knock out a couple of these capital or pink sheet items that need to be addressed. The patch truck, we know, is past its time. If we don't fund it this year, it's going to be tough to fund it next year. These are items that won't have a holdover carryover cost with the exception of the HR software, but as we learned through our conversation last time, it seemed as though that could lead to some really good efficiencies within the department that may cut some soft costs in that department long term. Also some paper costs and some copy costs. So to me, this seems like a wise move to make given our current budget situation. I personally would feel much more comfortable waiting to see how sales tax and property tax revenues work out over the next 9 to 10 months before we fully commit ourselves to a full-time finance director, given the budget challenges we will be facing in 2015.
Thank you. Other comments? Mr. Scrivener.
We've had a lot of conversation about this, and quite frankly, I've talked to people outside the council, to people whose opinion I value, people who are in the realm of finance and so forth. I even spoke to a previous city finance director, and quite frankly, they all are telling me that our current situation is unsustainable, and that being that to have someone who has the skill set that and the background that Bill has, in terms of if he were to leave or for some reason it became necessary to replace him, to replace the combination of IT skills and finance skills would probably be quite difficult to find somebody that would feel like they had the combination to respond. However, that being said, and with full acknowledgement that most people have counseled me that we should have a finance director, I agree with Ken. The improvement that we would get over what we have right now would be incremental. I don't know how much better it would be, but you wouldn't be getting 100% improvement, because we've got a pretty good situation now. And if you improved it 10% or 15% or even 40 or 50%, is that worth $130,000 of ongoing expense? I'm willing to say that we will get adequate service from the situation we have now, full well knowing that at some point in time we need to do something permanent. But in order to be able to to fund some of the other things that I think are more necessary at this time, and to not incur ongoing expense for next year that when we already know that we're going to have a difficult time next year, I would be in support of this motion.
Thank you. Other comments? Mr. Bray?
Well, by my count, we have the finance director's position is empty. The fire department, we have an interim chief. Ron Davenport's position is empty, and I'm getting complaints now about things taking too long in that department. That position is empty. And Public Works, we have an interim director of Public Works at this time. I think it's very important that we hire a finance director as soon as we find a qualified person, and we need the salary there to be able to hire them, whether it be November or January or April. We're going to need that salary there to hire them, and we need to fill that position so we can start looking at these other positions and get those filled. So I am not comfortable postponing the finance director's position. I think it's important that we fill it as soon as we can during FY14, and then we're going to need to figure out in 2015 how we address these other positions that remain vacant, very important positions. So I will be voting against this motion.
Thank you. Other comments? Mr. Hussey?
Thank you. I think we all understand there's vacancies and they're going to have to be addressed, and there can be a prioritization to them. And I think we understand that this finance situation is going to have to be figured out. But I guess I'm concerned. I'm not certain that the council, and maybe it happened prior to my time, has had a really thorough conversation to prioritize some of those positions as well. And I think the budget process does that. Do we prioritize finance director over public works, or over fire chief, or over other positions? Do we prioritize some of these director level positions over some of our frontline vacancies that are in existence? And so I certainly don't disagree that it's going to be a situation that's going to have to be addressed. I think there's a lot of uncertainties in the budget right now, and there's a lot of unknowns for next year. We have to kind of see what happens. I think that this is an approach to take care of some capital projects. It's still set aside some funds in contingency that we can get creative with, or if we want to, put some money towards hiring the position in the third or fourth quarter. But I also think leaving some funds in contingency, or if we set them aside in the fund balance even, gives the council some opportunity to wait and see how 14 goes. I guess I'm just hesitant to commit $130,000 at the beginning of this budget cycle when we know that 15 is going to be tough, and we're still a little unsure as to what our sales tax is going to do, the impact of R.R. Donnelly on our economy, the loss of those jobs, and just at what point does our sales tax revenue start to take the right turn in comparison to state revenues. And so I think, obviously I made the motion, that I think it's a prudent measure. This is what we're faced with our budget year, the way our fiscal year works. We have to make these decisions now, and I guess I'm just hesitant to fully fund that position just yet when we have some capital needs that are in front of us too.
Thank you. Mrs. Carroll?
Thank you, and I would agree with that, and I know Councilman Scrivener, when you made the comment that it's not sustainable, and I think that is something that is a good observation, and we know that, and I think that at the same time, for those who are looking in from the outside who aren't as closely involved or haven't had a chance to truly be involved, they would see that over the last several months how far we've come with this budget, with our information, finance committee meetings that have given us information more than we've seen in a long time, and Bill has not only done what we've asked, but I think he's excelled and done extra. So I'm very happy with where we're at today. It's not sustainable, it's not where we want to be, but I think it's gotten us more than what we even expected, and gotten us into a good position this budget year with the information that we truly need, and it gets us working towards where we want to be. So I agree with that. Thank you.
Mr. Scrivener?
I want to make sure that everyone that might be listening understands, I'm not saying that Bill and Sheila and the people who are doing the work for us aren't doing a great job. And by unsustainable, I don't mean that I don't have confidence in what's being done. I'm saying unsustainable as a model, that we have a unique situation here, that the talents of someone we had on staff just happened to be able to provide us the level of service that we've gotten. It's unusual, probably, and this is the advice that I was getting from others that I talked to. It's unusual to find someone that has an IT background that probably could step in and do what Bill has done in the finance arena. And it would be unusual to find somebody in the finance arena that has the IT skill sets that Bill has. And so if you were to if you were to combine those two departments in the manner that we had talked about earlier, and then advertise for that position, you probably would have a hard time finding a person with that level of IT expertise and finance expertise. That doesn't mean that there might not be some way to adjust the current situation, and maybe I don't think we probably want to discuss that tonight, but there'd be a way perhaps to change some of the job responsibilities and the reporting and so on and so forth, and adjust the situation as it exists today to a more favorable working arrangement than what we have, again, as on an interim basis. I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying it's even ideal, but I am saying it has worked, and it is working, and I could see it working for a few more months while we try to understand better what our revenue situation is going to be for next year.
Additional comments? Mr. Bray?
I agree that we will probably not hire a finance director in the first month of 2000 of the fiscal year. And so we probably will not require the entire amount of $130,000. So at some point during FY14, once we do hire a finance director, we will know how much we have saved during those months that we are in a search and looking for the right person. So if we hire someone in January or in April, we will have funds left over that we will not have spent on that salary, and at that time we can come back and visit these items that Councilman Hussey is speaking about. I really urge you to think about defeating this motion in favor of hiring a finance director as soon as we can find that qualified person. I agree that Bill and the staff and finance people, they have done a fantastic job. But we need a finance director for the future of Jefferson City, and I believe we need to do it now. So I'll still be voting against this.
Other comments? Mr. Graham?
I guess this is probably a question for HR. As relates to the possible hiring of a finance director, what is the time frame? What was in the past? What has been the time frame for advertising, application process, and all of that? What's the time frame for that?
It is, you're looking at it as good 4 to 5 months. Advertising for a position like that, we typically do a national recruitment. And we put it into a number of publications for that career field, and a lot of times those publications are monthly publications, that type of thing. So by the time you hit deadlines and stuff like that, your advertising deadline usually has to be at least about 2 months out minimum. And then by the time you go through the hiring process, and then typically they have to give notice at another location, which easily could be a month for a position like that. So minimum of 4 months, probably maximum of about 6.
Mr. Mahalovich?
I'm real conflicted over this. I had visualized us bringing a finance director on board, and I thought, well, what are we going to gain out of that? The value-added proposition that Councilman Scrivener brought up. And what I'm very much interested is economic forecasting, to understand what drives the city, what drives us in terms of our revenues and expenses, and to get a handle around the future, really, because we're looking at what could be as much as $1 million next year shortfall, or needing to that's not the right term, but need to come up with for next year, including the pink sheets and such. So I was valuing the hiring of a person to get us around financially the forecasting necessary to right the ship in terms of long-term, so we're not planning on $1 million down next year. Also, I was looking at I think the Finance Committee is looking at economic incentives. We need to leverage everything we got to try to bring back dollars to the city, to look at ways that we're going to be able to generate revenue. And in that chair, I don't know that those are the things that we get currently. And we've all said how we are pleased with what we got, but it's kind of what we're going to get. And that's the value proposition. The second thing is, as you know, that it's no secret I'm interested in some sort of advancing of accountability and giving that out to the public, and for no better term, an accountability portal. And I thought I don't want to be making policy through budget, but down the road I would like to see more done with describing the good things that are going on with the city. And I thought with Bill possibly focusing back on IT that we can make some advancements on that. And this is only Rick speaking, and in the back of my mind that was the value proposition. And so that's my comment.
Thank you. I do want to clarify a comment that you made about being down $1 million. As Mr. Nicholas indicated, we're between 350 and 420,000, and I know your number included the $450,000 for an HVAC system for the police department. So that's what's getting us those pink sheet items. Just for clarification. Thank you for your comments. Other comments, Mr. Scrivener.
And quite honestly, that's the argument, if you will, if you want to use that others have made, that said we ought to have a finance director. And I think it's a very legitimate point. We had a finance director for a number of years, and so I'm not sure we got a really, really good projections and the type of information that you're talking about. So what's critical, if we hire someone, is that we bring someone on board that does offer that expertise. Otherwise, we have an expense that is not bringing us what we want. And I understand that those things are very, very important and very valuable, and that's what you definitely expect of a finance director in the public sector. They're very concerned with how to maximize tax benefits and how to maximize depreciation schedules and how to create profits and so on and so forth like that. I presume that sort of expertise is also present in the public sector when it comes to finance directors, but I guess I'm skeptical of whether or not we would really gain that much from over and whether I'm skeptical whether or not we could that they would come in and show us the way to the promised land, so to speak. I guess I could be convinced if enough of you are in favor of a finance director, I could have my mind changed, I suppose. But right now I'm skeptical.
Mr. Mayor?
As I guess kind of the guy who originally brought this idea up, but I would just chime in right quick. Since the beginning, as many of you guys know, had a short list, and on that short list, it's actually behind my wall at Phillips and Company behind the door, and the finance director was on top of that. And the reason being is that when I first became mayor, became good friends with Steve and the people that we work with here every day, and as Steve was leaving, he said, hey, make sure you watch this, and don't forget that there's blank and blank next year that they don't have to pay and they can do this and do that. He had experience. He had experience not just in being a finance director, he had an experience here. And I think as you look around this room, most of our people have experience. We need a experienced finance director. We've got the two largest projects ahead of us in our potential projects in our city's history, with Bill's multi-purpose building and hopefully someday a conference center. I don't want to walk into either one of those projects without the right type of financial mind that our city deserves. I understand everything that everyone has said, but as the mayor, that's where I was coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Nicholas.
Well, I just want to say, there's a reason why I did not include it in my budget, and I did the same analysis essentially that Mr. Scrivener's looking at. Do we gain $130,000 worth of benefit for it? And I concluded that we don't. And let me tell you, I interviewed in the course of 2 rounds of interviewing. I looked through probably 500 resumes, and I certainly interviewed at least 100, if not 200, potential finance directors. 100 maybe. Talking telephone interviews. Anyway, and I looked at all those resumes. You're not going to find that in a finance director. Let me tell you what a finance director is, because I don't think that there's a really good understanding of that. It is a management position, okay? They manage the finance department. They make sure that the accountants are producing the right information. They are not economists. If you want to hire an economist, then we should hire an economist. But I did not see one of those people that I interviewed who claimed in their resume that they had the capability to do economic predictions. Not a single one of them. And I don't think you're going to find that with the job description that we're putting out. I agree with you, it's something we need. But the finance director is not, if you advertise for a finance director, you're not going to get that. What you're going to get is somebody who can keep the finance department in check, make sure they're doing the things that they need to be doing, understand and translate the information that the accountants speak. And I, with all due deference to these ladies who I like very much, they will tell you that they speak an entirely different language. They speak this accounting language. And it has to be translated so that you all understand it, so that I understand it, so that the public understands it. And that's the role the finance director provides. Right now, I have a team that is working and providing that function very, very well. And my priorities would certainly be in other things. And I think you have to look, as Mr. Schulte, asked me to point out at the beginning, that's $100,000 not only in this budget, but it's $100,000 towards that, in that deficit next year. You could cut that deficit in half by eliminating that. So that's why I did not include it in my budget.
Mr. Prather.
Well, I agree in the short run that the 130,000, we may not get our benefit right away, but in the long term, I've always supported having a finance director. My background's in finance, and I can see the importance of being able to interpret the numbers, and very important, spending full-time job looking at that and not having other activities to look at, focusing straight on that. And like I said, I'm in full support of having a finance director.
Mrs. Carroll?
One point that I would want the council to consider, just so we're completely clear on this motion, is looking at the timeline. I know Gail mentioned 3 to 6 months, and knowing we've already done 2 searches, I would guess the 6 months would be more appropriate. But the other piece of that is we never concluded yet a decision on certain department directors living inside or outside city limits, and I would guess that will take a 6-month decision on the council. I think we talked about it 6 months or maybe more before at administration, And I'm not trying to sound, I'm just trying to be real. Like, I'm trying to be realistic in that there are things that Ken has mentioned that we could say we could fund this year. A finance director is one, I think we're really in agreement. I think all 10 of us agree we need a finance director. My concern is timing. If the motion fails, the items perhaps that we want to get funded won't get funded, and at the same time, we'll talk 6 months about whether the finance director should live in or outside city limits, and then a 3 to 6 month search, because that has to be done before we do the search. So I'm just concerned that we could say, well, let's hold off, and then we have 1 year of working on a finance director, and then none of these items have been funded that could have been. So that's why that's even another benefit, because of the time it's going to take to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew, Mrs. Strope, correct me, didn't we pass the ordinance regarding department directors and where they live within relationship to the city limits?
We did change it for finance director, city councilor, human resources director, IT director, and I think planning and code enforcement, to where it's a 15-mile limit.
Okay. I thought that we had addressed those, so. Mr. Prather?
I have a different take on that. I appreciate the things that Ken has brought up, and we do need to address some of those issues. And should it happen that we don't hire a finance director for 6 months because of the procedure, the process we go through, we'll have that money then to address those other things. So it's not dire that we have it right now, but it is dire that if we don't plan for a finance director now, we won't have the money later.
Thank you. Did you have anything, Mrs. Carroll?
And I'll apologize then. I thought that I know Public Works was still out there. I thought we tabled the whole thing to take back to committee. So, okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bray?
I'll call for the question.
Second.
We have a motion to call for the question and a second. Discussion calling for the question. All in favor to call for the question signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Roll call, please. On the motion.
Carroll.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Henry.
Nay.
Hussey.
Aye.
Mahalovich.
Nay.
Prather.
Nay.
Schulte.
Nay.
Scrivener.
Aye.
Branch.
Nay.
Bray.
Nay.
Motion fails. Any other items to bring before the council for potential adjustments to the budget? Mr. Bray?
I'd like to eliminate the contingency and move those funds into fund balance.
We have a motion on the floor to eliminate the contingency account and just let those funds roll into funds balance in the budget. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Mr. Bray?
I think it's important that the council retains its authority over the funds of the city, and I think the fund balance is the right place to do that.
Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Hussey.
I'll just state that I mean, I think I disagree. I think we've got a cap. I think if we wanted to have conversation about the spending authority of the city administrator to make expenditures without council approval, that would be fine. My concern is, though, that to move something to the fund balance, correct me if I'm wrong, requires council action. And so if there was an expense of an item that was as little as, a couple $100 over what was budgeted, I believe that would require then, council action if it had to come out of the fund. If there was no contingency. And I think the contingency is in existence to provide for that. Now, whether or not the level of the contingency is too high, and if there's concerns by that, I'm just concerned if you get rid of the whole contingency fund, move it all, you provide no flexibility and leeway.
Mr. Bray?
Councilman Hussey, I can assure you that there's history has shown that there's lots of flexibility in the budget. And the city administrator is very familiar with the budget and very and resourceful when he needs to move funds for purposes of the city government. So there are many accounts in here that there are sources for, the amount of items you're talking about. But also, it's important that we try to grow our fund balance if possible as well. And we can't grow the fund balance if we don't put the money in there. And then if any money needs to come out, the council has the authority to do that, and only the council.
Other comments before we vote? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Graham,
Nay.
Henry,
Aye.
Hussey,
Nay.
Mahalovich,
Aye.
Prather,
Aye.
Schulte,
Aye.
Scrivener,
Aye.
Branch,
Aye.
Bray,
Aye.
Carroll,
No?
Motion passes. Other,
Just a quick
Mr. Hudson.
question. I don't have a motion, I just have a question. Now that that action's been taken, if somebody is to make a motion to expend funds, they can no longer, the contingency is zero now in our budget. Am I correct in that? No, so if I make a motion to spend $10,000 on new carpet in here, I need to declare that's coming out of fund balance now. Okay, just one
that would be
clarification
correct. It would
for,
come out of fund
okay,
balance.
just clarifying.
That is correct. Mrs. Carroll.
I'll move that we take $7,500 out of fund balance, our newly, increased fund balance, to fund the 2 floating holidays. And this would be pending council approval at next Monday night's meeting because it is on the agenda. So this motion would be putting this into the budget so that would be funded pending approval at Monday night's meeting.
Okay, we have a motion to fund $7,500 for floating holidays. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion. Mr. Prather.
I'm not sure if it's appropriate to discuss this now since it has not been passed by the council. I mean, I guess we can discuss it, but make a motion. Are we going to have another meeting after this, or is this it? Is this the final budget meeting?
Depends what happens here in the next 15, 20 minutes.
And then maybe I should clarify then, I guess with Nathan or Drew, does this have to be, doesn't it have to be funded? I was under the impression if it wasn't and then it passes next week, it won't even apply to this budget, but I want to make sure then maybe I'm incorrect.
Well, there's a lot of variables, I guess. The ordinance, as it's written now, says that the money has to be in the budget on November 1st in order to authorize the city administrator to grant the floating holidays. So, certainly there would be time before November 1st to change the budget if that's what was desired. Certainly, also, though, if the council is ready to do the floating holidays, it would make sense to put the money in now. Of course, the ordinance that's drafted currently might be changed before it's passed, so I don't know if I answered your question or not. Could I kind of or not really?
Could the ordinance be structured in such a way that it triggers the funding mechanism for it as well as a part of the ordinance?
Yes.
So at that point, it'd all be wrapped up into one?
Yep.
Well, that's up to you.
That's fine, I'll withdraw then.
Okay. Motion and the withdrawal of the second as well. Other items the council wishes to discuss? Mr. Hess.
I don't necessarily have I mean, can we have some open discussion here? Does it require a motion to have a discussion on anything right now?
Fire away. If you have some comments.
I guess my thought is that we've sort of talked about JCTV. We've had, input from the public at our last council meeting, and clearly it's in the city administrator's budget, not in the mayor's budget. I think before, and not necessarily making a motion at this moment, I think we need to create some resolution to that issue, and whether that requires us taking an actual vote or putting something together. We've allocated $5,000 for a cameraman It's my understanding that we're required to give 90 days notice on the termination of a contract with JCTV. Even if we terminated that contract tonight, that puts us, 4 weeks into the month of November. My assumption would be that we would still owe them funds then in the next fiscal year from general revenue on that contract, which is not budgeted right now, which is $9,500, $9,600 or so. I guess maybe I don't feel like we've had a good discussion about that issue publicly yet to make a determination. We've heard about it. We've had presentations about it. We've seen budget recommendations on it, but I guess I'm not comfortable quite yet with passing a budget tonight and committing to something on that particular aspect without at least exploring some of the options that Ms. Enlow's presented to us, trying to figure out what exactly are our goals and objectives from public television regarding government for the next fiscal year, and how that relationship with Lincoln University can be going forward. And so I throw that out there just to see if others have the same thoughts or feedback or ideas.
Thank you. Mrs. Carroll.
Thank you. To that point, I wonder if we could ask Gloria Enlow, who's here, if she could provide some information for the next budget meeting, and maybe in advance of the next budget meeting would be helpful, because I know you are currently working with public schools, so there's kind of a missing factor. You're in negotiations right now, but we're on a deadline. In fact, we're very close, probably at the next budget meeting. Looking at the time in our meeting, I think goes about till now, but if you could provide some of those details to us for the next, in advance of that next budget meeting, would that be a good way to then begin the discussion at the next meeting?
My intent, if there's no other motions to be made, I was going to accept a motion to adopt the budget. I think we've had a lot of opportunity to discuss JCTV, and I think there has been a lot of discussion. I mean, if it's the council's pleasure and they want to come back and talk about it some more, I mean, that's up to the council. Mr. Hilbert, did you have a comment?
I did. I talked to Bob Weber, who did give me the number, at least from his perspective, was $7,200 a year that the school would add to JCTV for the programming. Whether that ends up being the final number or not, of course, is unknown, but that's where he thought it was.
And I do want to be clear, I don't want to stifle conversation, discussion, so if there is discussion to be made, let's talk about it, but if there's not, I would like to move forward. Mr. Henry?
I guess, and I'm pretty conflicted with this issue as well, being a liaison for JCTV and wanting to see some support with JCTV from the city. But I've been through this book. I don't know where we pull the money from. I just simply don't know where we pull it from. And then also you get the news that, you know, next fiscal year we'll be going into the hole as it is, over $300,000. It's hard for me to figure out where I could offset money, where I could offset other monies to put in $110,000 with where we're at right now. And I think that's been the that's kind of been the discussion all along. Where do you pull that other money from? If anybody else has any suggestions, I'm willing to listen, but I just don't know where you pull that money from.
Thank you. Mr. Prather?
I'd like to possibly have another meeting. I mean, I have some questions, you know, for example, where are we at on, you know, the healthcare? How exactly is that going to affect our budget? And I'm sure some of the other councilmen and women are going to have questions on certain things on how, you know, for staff that may affect our budget. So, I mean, if we're prepared to go tonight and do that, that's fine. But I think that I would favor another meeting if someone, you know, if everybody wants to have a little time to think about it.
Is that the consensus of the group? I'm seeing nods, shake. Okay, that's great. Mr. Scrivener.
And I have a question. Mr. Bray made a comment a while ago that kind of struck a chord with me. So I want to ask Ms. McMillan, which in your budget, which one of these personnel positions represents the position of Ron Davenport, the empty position? And I'm back on page around 97. Is that getting close to where, or not 97?
Yeah,
99?
page 97.
Is it 97? Well, you have a list of personnel on page 99. Which one of those positions? Is he the senior housing inspector? What was his title? Or what was his position?
The first position listed, Building and Inspection Division Director.
That, 10531?
Yes.
Oh, that's the
Yes.
department, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so that first position represents what it would take to replace him. Of course, he has time in grade, so
Right.
it wouldn't necessarily require that. But you know, you make a great point when you're talking about priorities, and I think a lot of us have had phone calls of concern about that particular issue. I don't know if there's any way to fund that, but when you're talking about funding positions, I think that's an important one. That's a pretty high priority position to fund. So maybe if we meet again, you and I can talk some before that next meeting, and maybe I could have a better number the next time. I mean, I hadn't really brought that up, but
Okay.
Mr. Bray did bring it up, and I think it's been something that's been on my mind. But again, because like Mr. Henry said, where do you pull money from? So,
Mrs. Carroll?
Thank you. Before I move to adjourn, when is the next budget meeting? Is it Thursday night this week?
Well, that's why I was just getting ready to ask the council or the budget committee on the published agenda or the published schedule. Our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, September the 9th. And I really hate to go that long. Is everybody available this Thursday?
don't we have a meeting this Thursday?
Does that give everybody enough time to ask the questions that they?
Do we have a meeting scheduled with the conference? When is that meeting? The 5th? Okay.
That's
So it's the
September
next
5th.
Thursday.
This Thursday is, the 29th.
Okay.
Is everybody available on this side on the 29th? Okay, over here? Everybody okay for the 29th? Okay, we will schedule our next meeting for this Thursday, August 29th, 5:30 here in the council chambers. With that,
Sean?
I would, yes, sir. Mr. Mayor.
I just have a little number sharing here to what Councilman Henry said. I know that Gloria mentioned the other day it was like a third. What I tried to do sometimes in the budget process was look at something, 20%, 25%. In this case, maybe 30%. I mean, a lot of times you can come up with 30 or 40. You may not be able to come up with 50. So just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Okay, accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Yes, sir.